I've come to Glasnevin Cemetery, Dublin, to visit the graves of 3 famous Laois men of the 19th century and to give an account of their funerals. This cemetery was founded by Daniel O'Connell, and it was opened for the first time in February 1832, then known as Prospect Cemetery. First, I'm taking you to the grave of a Stradbally man, John Canon O'Hanlon. He was born in 1821 in a house that once stood on the site now occupied by the Presentation Convent in Stradbally. A small plaque outside the convent building marks his birthplace. There are many terms to describe Canon O'Hanlon. Apart from being a Catholic priest, he was a writer, an historian, a poet, an artist, a travel writer, a folklorist, and he even became a character in Joyce's Ulysses. In his native County Laois, he is probably best remembered for his History of the Queen's County in 2 volumes. In fact, he can be credited with 28 publications, some of which were published after his death, as well as many articles in other publications. One of his works, Lives of the Irish Saints, consisted of 10 substantial volumes. In a previous production, I spoke about Canon O'Hanlon's role as the Honorary Secretary of the O'Connell Monument Committee, which oversaw the erection of the O'Connell Monument in O'Connell Street, and how his perseverance and determination saw that project through to a successful completion. Such was Canon O'Hanlon's notoriety and importance that when he died in May 1905 as parish priest of Sandymount in Dublin, several articles appeared in the newspapers of the time announcing his death, which occurred at his residence at the Presbytery in Irishtown, Dublin. The Irish Independent stated that Canon O'Hanlon's death leaves a blank amongst the workers in the great field of historical research, which time only can fill up. A great and generous heart has been stilled in death. A noble and self-sacrificing priest has been called to his reward, and the last word has been written by one who has done a magnificent share in the work of setting down, so that it may not die forever, the story of Ireland's ancient glory in the lives of her sainted men. The Evening Herald stated that the death of Canon O'Hanlon removes from our midst a man who on several grounds was entitled to be regarded as one of the most notable Irishmen of the day. The Freeman's Journal said that the future ecclesiastical historian of Ireland, whoever he may be, must forever feel indebted for the material ready to his hand to the good priest whom we all mourn today. And so, in light of Canon O'Hanlon's fame and notoriety and the respect in which he was held, it was no surprise that his funeral was a large one. The Leinster Express reported that on Wednesday the 17th of May 1905 his remains were removed from his own beautiful Church of the Star of the Sea for interment in Glasnevin Cemetery. Throughout the entire of the districts, signs of mourning were apparent. The blinds of all the houses were drawn, business was suspended, and there was a touch of tenderness and feeling suggested by the fact that as the sad cortege left the Star of the Sea Church, the bell of the Protestant church tolled out its solemn notes of sympathy. There was a large attendance of clergy and an immense concourse of the general public. According to the Irish Independent, the cortege was an exceedingly large one, and as it wended its way to the cemetery, the heads of passers-by were uncovered and devout prayers were offered up for the repose of the soul of the deceased clergyman. Inscribed in both Irish and English, this impressive Celtic cross was erected in March 1907 by his parishioners and friends to record their sorrow for his loss and their veneration for his learning and holiness. I'm going to take you back farther in time now, to the year 1849, to visit two graves of Laoismen who were interred here at the height of the Great Famine, John Keegan and James Finton Lawler, both from the rural Laois parish of Raheen. Their burials took place here 6 months apart to the exact day. In 1849, the funeral processions did not enter the cemetery by the main entrance that we are familiar with today on the Finglas Road. Instead, the cemetery entrance in use at that time was from Prospect Square, the location of this beautiful entrance. The Latin inscription translates as, "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord." It's worth noting also that at the period of the funerals of Keegan and Lawler, and right up to 1853, Cuban hounds were kept in the cemetery grounds to guard against body snatchers. First, I'm taking you to the grave of James Finton Lawler, the political writer and activist, who was buried only a short distance from the Prospect Square entrance on the 30th of December 1849 in the garden section, one of the oldest parts of Glasnevin Cemetery. His burial took place following a funeral that formed into a procession 4 deep and extended the full length of O'Hanlon Street, then called Sackville Street, as it wended its way here to Glasnevin. Lawler was born in March 1807 at Tinnick near Raheen in County Laois, the eldest of 12 children of honest Pat Lawler, a prosperous tenant farmer and later MP for Queen's County. Lawler's political writings began in the Nation newspaper in 1847 and continued in the Irish Felon, which he jointly founded with John Martin in 1848. In his native County Laois, he is commemorated by a fine statue erected outside the offices of Laois County Council, adjacent to James Finton Lawler Avenue. His death in December 1849 followed a period of deterioration in his health. He had been imprisoned for several months in the second half of 1848 after the felon offices were raided, and he was released on ill health grounds. In September 1849, he was to lead an attack on Cashel Barracks as part of a simultaneous rising planned for several southern counties. However, after laying out all night under a bush, he was unable to muster an adequate force to proceed with the plan, and he returned to Dublin, where his health deteriorated further. He was confined to bed for some time prior to his death in Great Britain Street, now known as Parnell Street, and a group of friends were present when he passed away at 5 p.m. on the 27th of December 1849. One of those present subsequently wrote that Lawler knew well that he had not long to live. The doctor was called. He gave him a drop of brandy and went away again. The drink put life into him. "How do you feel now?" a person said to him. "Just the same as any man who has just drunk a glass of brandy," answered James Finton. Everyone laughed, and his friend added that he had all the appearance of a person who was getting better. "There is no use in talking about getting better," remarked James Finton. "I've run my course, and that is it. The doctor knows very well. He gave me a brandy because he knows that nothing can do me any harm now. By the time he comes back, I'll be dead, and he doesn't give a damn about that." After saying all that, he was short of breath again. Soon afterwards, it was clear to see that 1 minute he suffered from spasms, the next he was as quiet as a lamb. The doctor was sent for again. He came in a hurry. He put his hand on James Finton's cold pulse and let it go immediately. "He is as dead as a doornail," said he. "Would any of you have a pinch of snuff?" The day of James Finton Lawler's funeral was a Sunday, and it was fine and dry. At 1 o'clock the hearse pulled by 6 horses arrived. The followers would not allow the coffin to be carried in any other way than on their own shoulders. The empty hearse went on ahead of them, the large crowd behind it in ranks of 4. Behind that again were all kinds of carriages. The funeral crowd filled Sackville Street from end to end. It went around College Green to Parliament Street, across the Liffey again, and Capel Street, Bolton Street, Dorset Street, and from there to Glasnevin. The chaplain, already vested, awaited them to recite the prayers for the dead. Lawler's resting place is marked by this gravestone, erected by the National Graves Association in 1933, inscribed in Irish and English. The Irish inscription describes him as a faithful Irishman who gave his life in pursuit of freedom of our country and to improve the state of Irish people in their native land. Finally today, I'm taking you to the grave of a fellow parishioner of Lawler's, John Keegan, the famed poet, writer and storyteller from Killaney near the village of Shanahoe in County Laois. Unlike the vast funerals of Lawler and O'Hanlon, Keegan's funeral and his passing went unnoticed until a week after his interment. Even though his death was only 6 months earlier than Lawler's death, he was buried in a different part of Glasnevin Cemetery, in what was known as the Old Poor Ground, at some distance from the garden section where Lawler was interred. In effect, Keegan died a pauper in a workhouse of the South Dublin Poor Law Union, having contracted cholera during the epidemic of the late 1840s. And, like other paupers of the time, he was buried here without ceremony in a pauper's plot. From the workhouse to the pauper's grave, a common occurrence of this time. Being a victim of cholera, his burial was a hasty one, taking place on the day of his death. A strict ritual involving masked gravediggers and a deep, lime-lined grave was afforded to the cholera corpses, with the only attendees being the gravediggers. The date was Saturday, the 30th of June, 1849. Keegan was just 33 years old. First to report his death was the Leinster Express, which published a substantial obituary on the following Saturday. This week, it said, with deep sorrow we announce the death of John Keegan, who, for his originality and brilliancy of poetic genius, had few equals in Ireland. A week later, an obituary in the Irishman newspaper noted that another son of genius is gone. Death is becoming an epicure and selects the choicest victims. There were no legends familiar to the peasantry with which he was not acquainted. His poems were thoroughly idiomatic and racy of the soil. They were the Irish heart translated and set to music. Keegan's grave was unmarked until this Celtic cross was erected in June 1999 to mark the 150th anniversary of his death. In contrast to Keegan's funeral, a sizable crowd attended the unveiling ceremony on Saturday, the 26th of June 1999. The Celtic cross was designed by Dr. Padraig O'Mahan and it was sculpted by Brendan Crowe. On the centre of the cross is shown a quill, symbolising the writer. Then there is shown St. Peter as he appears in an 18th century painting that was the subject of one of Keegan's stories, The Deerhawk's Legacy. Beneath is an uilleann piper, in token of Keegan's famous poem Where the Piper, which is the subject of one of my previous video productions. At the base are inscribed 2 lines from Keegan's poem Tomorrow. It little matters why we fell, if we arise tomorrow. Keegan's memory lives on, in particular in his native Shanahoe, where his poetry and stories are taught and fondly spoken about in the local national school, on the grounds of which a tree was planted in his memory in 1991. I spoke earlier of the great historian Canon O'Hanlon. But for the research of O'Hanlon, John Keegan's writings, which were published in newspapers and periodicals of the 19th century, may never have come to light. O'Hanlon worked tirelessly to collect Keegan's writings, and his collection was subsequently published in 1907, 2 years after O'Hanlon's death. It is truly fitting, therefore, that they both rest here in Glasnevin Cemetery, only about 100 metres apart. I'm going to leave you now from Glasnevin Cemetery with a final thought about Canon O'Hanlon, one of the greatest Irish historians of the 19th century. For a man who dedicated over a quarter of a century of his life to the O'Connell Monument Committee between 1862 and 88, and for a man who worked so diligently for over 30 years up to the time of his death, researching and publishing the lives of the Irish saints, wasn't it remarkable that when he died in 1905, the date was the 15th of May. Not only was the 15th of May the anniversary of the death of Daniel O'Connell, who had died on that date in 1847, but it was also the feast day of St. Colman Mac O'Leisha of Auchaval or Oakvale in Stradbally, County Laois, O'Hanlon's native place. Perhaps this was no more than coincidental, but for the hard-working priest and man of faith that Canon O'Hanlon was, perhaps there was a deeper meaning or divine intervention which aligned these three events. Until the next time, farewell for now.